The old mantel clock struck 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the phone rang. I reluctantly pulled myself out of the shabby chair where I'd spent my time reading the newspaper. My knees creaked protestingly as I stood up. 72 years is no joke, especially when you live them alone. Alfred Greenlee speaking, I said into the receiver, adjusting my glasses on my nose. Mr. Greenlee? Psycho. The voice was male, unfamiliar. This is Bruce Norman, your son's law partner. I'm sorry, but, it's about Robert. There was something about the tone of that sentence that made my heart sink. What about him? He died this morning, Mr. Greenlee. He collapsed in the office. We called an ambulance, but they didn't get there in time. The doctors say it was a complication of diabetes. I slumped back in my chair, clutching the phone receiver to my knuckles. Yeah, I understand. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Helen asked me to call you. She's just unable. He sounded genuinely sympathetic. The room around me began to spin. My son, my Robert, dead at 51. Thank you, Bruce, I said mechanically before hanging up the phone. I sat motionless for a few minutes, staring into the emptiness of the living room of my old house, the house that had once been filled with the voices of my wife and little Robert. Now I was all alone. Instead of tears came memories. Robert at the age of 7 learning to ride a bike, his laughter when he finally succeeded. Teenage Robert, somber and withdrawn after his mother's death. Robert the college graduate, proudly showing me his economics degree. And Robert 10 years ago introducing me to his fiancée Helen, a slender woman with cold blue eyes and a perfect smile that never reached those very eyes. Dad, this is Helen Webb, Robert said then, beaming with happiness. We're going to be married. I remember shaking her cool hand, feeling a fleeting touch, as if she were afraid of catching old age from me. Even then, something alerted me. Maybe it was the way she looked over our meeting at the restaurant, as if estimating how much it would cost, or the way she wrinkled her nose slightly when I talked about my job as an accountant for a local building materials firm. Nice to meet you, Mr. Greenlee, she said then. Robert's told me so much about you. Just Alfred, please, I replied, trying to be cordial for my son's sake. Since we're family now. Of course, she nodded, but she never called me by my first name after that, preferring the impersonal you or Mr. Greenlee, as if she were doing me a favor. After they were married, everything changed. First, imperceptibly, Robert called less often, citing his busy schedule at his law office. Then our Sunday lunches became monthly, and then they became rare events. Sorry, Dad, Helen has an important show at her gallery, he'd say, canceling another appointment. Or, we promised to spend the weekend with Helen's friends. I remember visiting them for Christmas 5 years ago. Their house was full of people. Helen's friends, her parents, her sister, and her husband. Alfred, how nice of you to be able to come, Helen said when I showed up on the doorstep with the presents. We've set the table for you in the small dining room. The little dining room was a nook next to the kitchen, where the housekeeper ate lunch. Robert looked embarrassed but didn't say anything, only to whisper later as he walked me out. I'm sorry, Dad. Helen wanted everything to be perfect for her parents. You know how snobby they can be. And I thought then, when did my son start justifying his father being put at the servants' table? That night I heard them arguing in the kitchen. Couldn't you ask him to wear something decent? Helen hissed. That old sweater of his? My father asked if your father worked as a janitor. It's a Christmas sweater, Helen, Robert replied tiredly. And your father knows very well that my father was an accountant. Used to be is the key word. Now he's just an old man living on a pension. You could have at least persuaded him to get a haircut before he came. Every year, the gap between me and my son grew wider. Helen always found a way to come between us. She'd arrange a vacation on the weekend Robert and I were planning a fishing trip. She'd accidentally forget to give him my messages, or she'd mock our family traditions. Alfred, you don't expect Robert to spend all day baking that awful fruitcake from your mother's recipe, do you? She said with a fake smile. We can get a much better one at the candy store. And Robert, once so fond of making that pie with me, just shrugged as if it didn't matter anymore. My sister-in-law has always been ambitious. Her art gallery started out as a small store and turned into a trendy place that exhibited up-and-coming contemporary artists, as she called it. In reality, most of the paintings reminded me of childish scribbles. But what did I know about modern art? At least that's what Helen always said when I dared to express my opinion. I sighed, coming back to the reality of my empty living room. The phone rang again. Mr. Greenlee. It was Helen's voice, dry and businesslike. I suppose you've heard about Robert by now. Yes, I answered, clutching the receiver. Bruce has informed me. The funeral will be the day after tomorrow, at 11 in the morning at St. Thomas Church. I'm handling the arrangements. No, how are you, Asenor? I'm sorry. Just information, like I was just another item on her to-do list. I'd like to help, I said, trying to maintain my dignity. That won't be necessary, she cut me off. Everything's already been organized. You can come tomorrow night if you want to see him before the funeral. There was a click as she hung up without waiting for my reply. I slowly made my way up to the second floor, to the room that had once belonged to Robert. It had remained almost untouched since he'd left for college. Posters of rock bands on the walls, bookshelves filled with fiction and textbooks, an old baseball glove on the dresser. In a desk drawer, I found a photo album, the same one that Margaret, my late wife, and I had so diligently compiled. Every birthday, every school play, every graduation, it was all here. Robert's life in pictures before Helen came along. The last time I saw my son was a month ago. He stopped by unannounced, which in itself was unusual. Dad, I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by, he said then. But he looked tired and lost. We were sitting on the veranda drinking tea, and I noticed how he had slimmed down, how the shadows under his eyes had appeared. Are you all right, son? I asked. Yeah, just a lot of work. And this diabetes thing, it can be tough sometimes. Do you check in with the doctor regularly? He waved his hand. Of course. Everything's under control. But I could see he was lying. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just his health. How's Helen? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. A shadow ran across his face. She's fine. Busy with the gallery as always. He wanted to add something, but changed his mind, changing the subject. Now I wished I'd insisted, tried to find out what was bothering him. Maybe I could have helped. Maybe I slammed the photo album shut. Too late for regrets. Now I had to pull myself together and drive to my son's house. A house where Helen was already undoubtedly trying on the role of grieving widow. 2 hours later, I parked my old Toyota in front of their 2-story house in the upscale Mesquite neighborhood. The modern structure with its large windows and manicured lawn had never seemed cozy to me. Too sterile, too ostentatious, like Helen herself. Several cars were parked out front. Apparently friends or relatives had arrived. I took a deep breath before I pressed the doorbell. The door was opened by Bruce Norman, Robert's longtime friend and law partner. His eyes were red and his face gaunt. Alfred, he hugged me tightly. I'm so sorry. I was there when it happened. It was a normal day. We were discussing a case, and suddenly he just collapsed. We called an ambulance, but his voice trailed off. I patted him on the back, unable to utter a word. I'd always liked Bruce, the straight, honest man I'd known since he and Robert were in college. Come on in, he said finally, pulling away. Helen's in the living room with her parents. I walked through the spacious hallway into the living room, where a small group of people were talking quietly. Helen was sitting on the couch. Her parents, a prim couple with eyes as cold blue as their daughters, were on either side of her. When I walked in, the conversations died down. Helen looked up, and for a moment something like irritation flashed in her eyes before she put on a mask of restrained sorrow. Mr. Greenlee, she said, making no attempt to rise. You're here sooner than I expected. Hello, Helen, I nodded to her and her parents. Mr. and Mrs. Webb. Helen's father nodded faintly, and her mother pressed her lips together, as if my very presence was unpleasant. We were just discussing the funeral arrangements, Helen said. I've ordered white lilies for the church and… Robert always preferred simple wildflowers, I said quietly. There was an awkward pause in the room. This is a funeral, Mr. Greenlee, not a picnic in the park, Mrs. Webb said. Lilies would be appropriate. I didn't argue. What did it matter what flowers were for my son's funeral? There's no bringing him back. Could I see Robert? I asked, turning to Helen. His body is at the funeral home, she answered as if she were talking about a postal package. You'll be able to see him tomorrow before the ceremony. I understand, I swallowed the lump in my throat. In that case, I'd like to go up to his office. There are some of our family photos left there that I'd like to show at the memorial service. Helen frowned. I've already selected the photos for the slideshow. I'm sure there's room for a few from his childhood, I insisted gently. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Okay, just don't touch his work papers. They're necessary for the firm's business. I went up the stairs to the second floor, where Robert's home office was located. The room reflected his character, neat but not pedantic, with a comfortable leather armchair and bookshelves along the walls. There were pictures on the table, one of Helen on their wedding day, and an older one of the three of us, me, Margaret, and little Robert, on the beach. I sank into the chair and let the memories flood back. Here, away from Helen's cold gaze, I could finally give vent to my grief. My boy, my flesh and blood, gone forever. What was left for me now? A lonely old age, an empty house, and a sister-in-law who barely concealed her contempt for me. The tears finally came, the silent, bitter tears of an old man who had outlived his son. You're right, I made a mistake. Let's rewrite the chapter so it follows the plan and doesn't skip ahead to the funeral. They shouldn't be until chapter 3. The next morning greeted me with a headache and a sense of unreality about what was happening. It seemed that Robert's death was just a nightmare from which I was about to wake up. I caught myself reaching for the phone to call my son, as I had done every Sunday for the past few years. Sunday calls were the only thing left of our former close relationship. After showering and getting dressed, I ate breakfast with a cup of black coffee and toast that stuck in my throat. Outside my window, it was a perfect fall day, completely out of sync with my mood. The birds were singing, the neighborhood kids were laughing as they played in the yard. Life went on without noticing my loss. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I found myself in front of Robert and Helen's house again, this time with an album of photographs under my arm. I'd spent hours the night before choosing pictures for the memorial service. The ones that showed the real Robert, not the glossy lawyer Helen preferred him to be. To my surprise, it wasn't Helen who opened the door, but her younger sister Pamela, a carbon copy of Helen, only 10 years younger and with slightly warmer eyes. Mr. Greenlee, she nodded at me. Helen's upstairs talking to the caterer on the phone. She said to tell you that you can do the slideshow if you'd like. The laptop's in the living room. Thank you, Pamela, I replied as I made my way into the house. The living room was empty except for a maid dusting the shelves. Robert's laptop was on the coffee table, already turned on, with a presentation program open. I put my sketchbook next to it and sat down on the couch, feeling strange about doing such mundane things when my son was dead. But what else was I supposed to do? I wanted people to see the real Robert, not just the successful lawyer and husband of Helen Webb, but the boy who loved baseball and fishing, the teenager who wrote poetry, the young man with a twinkle in his eye and dreams of the future. As I looked through the photos already uploaded to the presentation, I noticed that they were all taken within the last 10 years, after Robert met Helen. Professional shots from their wedding, pictures from vacations in the Bahamas, Robert at charity events with important clients of their firm. Not a single snapshot from his childhood or adolescence, not a single photo with me or his mother. I started adding my own photos to the slideshow. Robert on his first bike, Robert holding the trophy for winning his high school chess tournament, Robert on college graduation day hugging me and glowing with pride. Each of these photos captured a piece of his life that Helen would rather have erased. Finished with the photos, I decided to see if there were any other pictures left on Robert's computer that I could use. Opening the folder of images, I saw many subfolders, neatly sorted by dates and events, so much like my pedantic son. As I searched, I accidentally clicked on a folder labeled Personal. It turned out to be password protected. My finger was already reaching to close the window when an idea occurred to me. I typed in Margaret, the name of Robert's mother. The folder wouldn't open. Then I tried Scouts on the name of our first dog, which Robert loved very much. And to my surprise, the folder opened. Inside were documents, not photos as I expected. Text files with inconspicuous titles like notes or thoughts. I knew I shouldn't read my son's personal notes, but something compelled me to open a file created just 3 weeks ago, entitled simply Diary. Got the test results back today. It's worse than I expected. Dr. Reynolds says I don't have more than 6 months without surgery. My kidneys are almost failing. I don't know how to tell my father. Helen thinks he shouldn't worry, that we should handle this on our own. But I can see him getting older. What if I don't make it? I froze, rereading those lines over and over. Robert knew he was dying and hadn't told me, at Helen's insistence. My hands began to tremble as I scrolled further down the page. Strange conversation with Helen today. She brought up the will, said we need to get it all set up right so there's no problems. Hinted that it would be better if we didn't leave anything to my father. She said he's old and doesn't need anything. I can't believe she meant it. I always thought money didn't matter to her. I moved on to the next entry, dated 2 weeks ago. Found some strange messages on Helen's phone from Bruce. Not work. Personal. Too personal for coworkers or even just friends. I don't want to believe what I'm thinking. Maybe I'm just getting paranoid because I'm sick. I need to talk to her straight. Bruce? Robert's partner in the firm and his best friend since college? The man who hugged me yesterday with tears in his eyes? I couldn't believe it. But the next entry, made the next day, left no doubt. She denies everything. She says I'm crazy, but I saw these messages with my own eyes. Miss you. Can't wait to be together again. And her replies, soon love, be patient. What soon did she mean? When I die. God, I can't believe I'm writing this. 10 years of marriage and she's with my best friend. I need someone to talk to, maybe my dad. He's always seen right through her. The last entry was dated just a week ago, the day before my last conversation with Robert. Made a new will today, didn't tell Helen. Called an old university friend who is now a notary in Dallas. It's all formalized. He's got a copy in the safe deposit box at the bank. I can't leave it all to her, not now that I know. Most of it's going to my dad. It's a shame I kept him at a distance for so long. She's been turning me against him all this time, and I was such a fool. I'll go to him tomorrow, try to hint to him about Helen and what's going on. I hope he'll understand. I set the laptop aside, feeling nauseous and dizzy. All this time, Helen had been cheating on Robert with his best friend. All this time, she'd been turning him against me. And when he found out he was dying, she'd convinced him to keep it from me, denying us the chance to reconcile, to spend the last months of his life together. And now she and Bruce were playing the spectacle of the grieving widow and the grief-stricken friend. Perhaps they were already planning their lives after Robert's funeral. I was shaking with rage. Did you find anything interesting? Helen's voice behind me made me wince. I quickly minimized the journal window, praying she wouldn't notice what I was reading. Just adding some pictures to the slideshow, I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. She moved closer, looking at the laptop screen. Why did you add all those old pictures? There was annoyance in her voice. People want to see Robert as he was in the last few years. You mean the way you wanted him to be? I couldn't resist being sharp. Helen frowned. What do you mean? Nothing. I forced myself to calm down. I just think people would be interested in Robert's whole life, not just the last decade. If you say so, she shrugged with the look of someone giving in to a child's whims. Just get rid of that one of him in the ridiculous hat. And that one from the fishing trip, he looks sloppy. I didn't say anything back, just stared at her and thought about the fact that my son had lived with this woman for 10 years. How could he not have seen her true face? Or did he? But it was too late. I'm not taking down any of the pictures, I said firmly. This is my son, and I want people to remember him for who he really is. Her eyes flashed with anger for a moment, but she got over it quickly. Okay, she said with a strained smile. After all, it wasn't that important. By the way, the flowers for the church have arrived. Maybe you could help me arrange them. I nodded, grateful for the opportunity to change the subject and come to my senses. Closing my laptop, I followed Helen into the dining room, where there were boxes of white lilies as cold and lifeless as Helen herself. The whole day passed in the hassle of preparing for the funeral. I tried to stay away from Helen and Bruce, who had arrived in the afternoon to help with organizational matters. Seeing them together, noticing the secret glances they exchanged when they thought no one was looking, was unbearable. Every time Bruce tried to offer me condolences or talk about Robert, I barely restrained myself from telling him what I thought. Instead, I concentrated on preparing the speech I was going to give at the memorial service. I wanted to find the right words to honor my son's memory, without giving away my knowledge of Helen and Bruce's betrayal, at least for now. In the afternoon, when most of the preparations were completed, I decided to go up to Robert's office again. I needed to find a copy of the new will, or at least find out where it was kept. Robert had mentioned in his diary that one copy was in a bank safe, but didn't specify which bank. I began carefully going through the documents in the drawers of my desk, trying not to disturb their order so that Helen wouldn't suspect anything. In the bottom drawer, I found a small box of Robert's personal effects, his first wristwatch, the one I'd given him for his 16th birthday, his Cub Scout badge, the pocket knife that had belonged to my father. All these things he kept, despite Helen's disapproval of them as junk. Under the box was an envelope with my name written in Robert's hand. I quickly tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, deciding to read it later, alone. It could be the same letter Robert had mentioned in his diary, the one he hadn't had time to send. In another drawer, I found a folder of financial documents. Among them was a copy of Robert's old will, dated 5 years earlier. According to that document, all of his property was to go to Helen, except for a small amount bequeathed to me. But there was no new will. I was about to close the drawer when I noticed a small note taped to the inside of the folder. Robert's handwriting, hurried and uneven. First National Bank of Mesquite, Safe Deposit Box 327. It had to be the same safe deposit box he talked about in his diary. I memorized the information, determined to check the bank as soon as possible. "What are you doing in Robert's office?" Helen's voice made me wince. I hadn't heard her come in. "Looking for some papers for the speech," I lied, closing the drawer. Her eyes narrowed. "I told you not to touch his work papers." "I'm sorry," I tried to look guilty. "I just wanted to find the exact dates of some events. My memory's not what it used to be." She looked at me carefully as if trying to see if I was telling the truth. Then her gaze softened, but only on the surface. "Let's go downstairs," she said. "The funeral director wants to go over some details of the ceremony." I nodded and followed her, feeling the weight of the letter in my pocket. I couldn't wait to read it, to find out what my son wanted to say to me before he died. Going downstairs, I met Mr. Collins, the funeral director, a thin man with a mournful expression on his face that seemed to be his natural state. "Mr. Greenlee," he shook my hand with his cool fingers, "my deepest condolences. We are here to discuss the final details of the ceremony. Mrs. Helen has already chosen the casket and decorations. All that remains is to agree on the order of service." We spent the next hour discussing the details of the funeral. Who would carry the coffin? Who would give the eulogy? What music would be played? Helen insisted on classical music, although Robert had always preferred jazz. When I pointed this out, she just dismissed it. "A funeral should be in the right mood, Alfred. Jazz is inappropriate." I didn't argue. After all I had learned, these details seemed insignificant. What mattered was that I knew the truth, and soon everyone would know it. When Mr. Collins left, Helen announced that she needed to meet with the caterer to discuss the menu for the memorial luncheon. I took the moment to slip away into the garden, a quiet place where I could read Robert's letter. The garden behind the house was the only part of their dwelling I liked. Robert had designed it himself against Helen's wishes to hire a landscaper. The same flowers and shrubs grew there, as in our old garden, the lilacs his mother had loved so much, the jasmine that filled the air with its sweet fragrance, the old apple tree in the corner. I sat down on the bench under the apple tree and pulled out the letter. The envelope was not sealed. Inside was a quadruple folded piece of paper. I unfolded it and began to read. "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, I'm probably no longer alive. I'm sorry to start off like this, but I don't have time for pleasantries. The doctors say that with my kidneys I won't last much longer. I should have told you in person, but Helen insisted that we keep my illness a secret. I can see why now. All this time she was just waiting for me to die so she could be free. Free to be with Bruce. Yes, Dad. My wife and my best friend betrayed me. I found out about a week ago when I accidentally saw their correspondence. I don't know how long it had been going on, but by the looks of it, years. I've changed my will. I don't want her to get everything after what she did. Most of it will go to you. A copy of the will is in a safety deposit box. First National Bank of Mesquite, box 327. The key is in my desk, in the little watch box you gave me for my 16th birthday. But most importantly, I want to apologize to you. for all these years of keeping my distance, for letting Helen come between us, for not seeing how she manipulated me, turned me against you. You were right about her all along. I'm going to stop by today, but in case I don't have time to explain, I'm writing this letter. I want you to know the truth, and I want you to help me get justice. I love you, Dad. I always have. Your son, Robert. I sat there unable to move, rereading the letter over and over. Tears ran down my cheeks, dripping onto the paper and blurring the ink. My son loved me. He finally realized what Helen had done to us, and he wanted to make it right, but he didn't have time. Now it was up to me to do the justice he asked for, and I knew what to do. Tomorrow at the funeral, when everyone is gathered, I will tell the truth about Helen and Bruce. I would show everyone who they really were. I folded the letter neatly and returned it to the envelope. Then I headed back to the house, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in years, I had a purpose, a clear and definite one, and I wasn't going to back down. At the house, I ran into Bruce, who had just come down from the second floor, probably from Helen's bedroom. He looked embarrassed to see me. "Alfred," he said, trying to keep his composure, "I was just coming to find you. I was wondering if you needed help with the speech for tomorrow's service." "Thanks, Bruce, but I'll be fine," I said, looking him straight in the eye. I'm sure I'll find the right words." Something in my tone made him wary. He looked at me carefully, as if trying to figure out what I knew. "Are you all right, Alfred?" he asked. "You look strange." "Just tired," I answered. "Tomorrow's a big day. I need to pull myself together." He nodded, clearly not convinced, but not daring to ask further. "Sure, get some rest. Call me if you need anything." I nodded and headed for the exit. I needed to get home, gather my thoughts, prepare for tomorrow, the day I would finally get justice for my son. On the way home, I stopped by the First National Bank of Mesquite. It was an hour before closing time, and I hoped to have time to check out the safety deposit box. I was lucky. A young bank employee recognized me as Robert's father, an advantage of living in a small town, and agreed to help, even though I didn't technically have access to the safe deposit box. "Mr. Greenlee, I'm so sorry about your son," he said, leading me into the vault. "Robert was a good man. He helped my family with legal problems without even taking a fee." In the vault, I showed him the key I'd found, and he opened box number 327. Inside was an envelope labeled "Last Will and Testament of Robert Allen Greenlee." I took it, thanked the employee, and left the bank, feeling that another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. At home, in the quiet of my living room, I opened the envelope and read the will. Just as Robert had written, he had changed everything. Most of his estate, including his house, his savings, and his share of the law firm, was to go to me. Helen would receive only the minimum amount required by law for a spouse. That was the last proof I needed. Tomorrow at the funeral, I'll show everyone Helen and Bruce's true colors. I will tell how they betrayed my son, how they waited for him to die so they could be together. I won't let them get away with it. With these thoughts, I went to bed, clutching Robert's picture tightly in my hand. Tomorrow was going to be a day of truth and justice. The morning of the funeral was overcast. Low gray clouds hung over Mesquite, threatening rain, as if nature itself shared my grief. I stood in front of the mirror, tightening my black tie, the same black tie I'd worn to Margaret's funeral 20 years ago. My hands trembled slightly, but not from grief. It was determination. In my jacket pocket were two things: Robert's letter and the printouts of his diary pages I'd made the night before. Evidence against Helen and Bruce. My weapons in the coming battle. St. Thomas Church was filled with people. Robert's law firm co-workers, clients, friends, acquaintances. Everyone came to say goodbye to him. The white lilies Helen had insisted on were everywhere, filling the room with a sweet scented aroma. At the altar stood a closed coffin, upholstered in dark wood and ornamented with silver. Expensive, like everything Helen had chosen. I sat in the front row next to Helen and her parents. She was dressed in an elegant black suit with a string of pearls around her neck, a gift from Robert for their 5th anniversary. Her face expressed restrained sorrow, but her eyes remained dry and cold. From time to time, she accepted condolences from people who approached, nodding gracefully and thanking them for their support. On the other side of her sat Bruce, wearing a dark suit and an expression of deep sadness on his face. He leaned over to Helen periodically, whispering something in her ear, ostensibly words of comfort. The hypocrisy of those two made me nauseous. The service began. The priest, who barely knew Robert, gave the standard words of comfort, talking about death and resurrection and how Robert was now in a better world. Then it was time for speeches from loved ones. Bruce was the first to speak. He spoke of his longtime friendship with Robert, of his professional accomplishments, of what a loyal friend and partner he had been, about how hard it would be to carry on without him. Robert wasn't just my colleague, Bruce said, his voice trembling with feigned emotion. He was my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone in this world. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms to hold back. Every word he said was a lie. The best friend who'd slept with his wife, who was probably waiting impatiently for him to die. After Bruce, other colleagues and friends spoke. They all spoke of Robert with respect and warmth, but no one really knew him. No one mentioned his childhood, his dreams, what he was like before he met Helen. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly and approached the pulpit. The faces of the crowd blurred before my eyes. Dozens of strangers who had come to say goodbye to a man they barely knew. My son, I began, and my voice sounded unexpectedly firm, was born on a clear spring day. When I first held him in my arms, he looked up at me with his blue eyes, and in that moment I vowed to always protect him. I talked about what Robert was like as a child, inquisitive, kind, stubborn, how he took care of his mother when she got sick, about his dreams of becoming a lawyer to help people. Robert always saw the best in people, I said, and my gaze slid to Helen, sometimes even when he wasn't there. I ended my speech with words of love and forgiveness and how I would miss my son every day for the rest of my life. When I returned to my seat, Helen didn't even look at me. After the church service, the procession headed for the cemetery. The day grew cloudier, and the wind picked up, ruffling the clothes and hair of those gathered. The coffin was lowered into the ground, and the priest said the last prayers. Helen threw a white rose on the coffin, her face a flawless mask of grief. People began to disperse, heading to their cars to drive to Robert and Helen's house for the memorial meal. I lingered at the grave, wanting to be alone with my son a little longer. "I'll honor your request, Robert," I whispered. "I promise." I felt a presence behind me and turned around. Helen was standing a few feet away, watching me. Everyone was gone, and we were alone among the gravestones. "You shouldn't be long, Alfred," she said, her voice no longer cold. "The guests are waiting. And you're not young. The chill wind could be dangerous to your health." I straightened up, looking her straight in the eye. "Are you worried about my health, Helen? This is unexpected." She moved closer, and a shadow of a smile appeared on her lips. Not a sad smile, but a predatory one. "Don't worry," she whispered, coming close. "You're next." The words, spoken with barely concealed anger, like a whiplash, made me flinch. Not from fear, but from the final realization of who I was dealing with. "Do you hope so, Helen?" I asked quietly. She took a step back, her smile gone. "Just stating a fact, Alfred. You're not young. That's the way the world works. Children usually bury their parents, but sometimes it's the other way around. And now that you've buried your son, it's your turn." She turned and walked to her car, where Bruce was waiting, pretending to offer a ride to his friend's widow. I stared after them, feeling a cold rage brewing inside. "You're next." Those words weren't just cruel, they were downright threatening. Helen wanted to get rid of me as the last obstacle to Robert's inheritance. She didn't know that I had already discovered the new will. She didn't know that I was aware of her affair with Bruce. At that moment, I made my final decision. No hesitation, no pity. At the wake, I will tell everyone the truth. Robert and Helen's house was full of people when I arrived. The guests were talking softly, sipping wine and setting food from the richly set tables. I noticed Helen moving gracefully between groups of people, accepting condolences and thanking them for their support. The perfect grieving widow. Bruce stayed nearby, helping her with the organization, pouring drinks, directing guests to tables with food. Sometimes their hands would accidentally touch, or they would exchange glances that lasted a little longer than necessary. To anyone who knew the truth, their behavior was almost defiant. I stood in the corner of the living room, watching and gathering my thoughts. Several people approached me, offering condolences, asking how I was holding up. I replied politely but briefly, not wanting to waste energy on idle conversation. Soon Helen rang a small bell, attracting the attention of the guests. "Friends," she began, her voice trembling with feigned emotion, "I would like to thank you all for coming today to say goodbye to my husband, Robert, the man I loved more than life." I felt nausea rising in my throat at her hypocrisy. 10 years ago, I met the man of my dreams," Helen continued, looking around at the crowd. "Smart, kind, honest. A man who always put the interests of others before his own. A man who supported me in everything, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Bruce stood beside her, nodding in time with her words, with an expression of deep sadness on his face. What actors! In another life, they might have won Oscars for their roles. "There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't thank fate for bringing us together," Helen continued, tears glistening in her eyes, the first tears she had seen all day. "Real or artificial. I know a part of me is gone with him, but I'm grateful for every moment we shared, for every moment of our love. It was too much. I couldn't listen to these lies any longer." Slowly but determinedly, I stepped forward into the center of the room. "Let me interrupt you, Helen," I said, my voice louder than I expected. All eyes turned to me. Helen froze, not realizing what was happening. "Alfred," she said with a strained smile, perhaps you'd like to say a few words too?" "Yes, Helen," I answered, pulling Robert's letter and the printouts of his diary out of my pocket. "I want to say a few words about the truth." There was silence in the room. Helen tensed, her eyes narrowed. "My son's friends and colleagues," I began, addressing the crowd. "You've heard a lot of words about Robert today, about what a professional friend husband he was, but you haven't heard about what really happened in the last weeks of his life, about what he learned in the days before he died." Helen took a step toward me. "Alfred, you're upset. That's understandable. But please, not now." "Right now," I cut him off, "when everyone is here to honor my son, to learn the truth." I picked up a printout of Robert's diary. My son kept a diary. In it, he described how he found out that his wife, I pointed to Helen, was cheating on him with his best friend and business partner. My finger moved to Bruce, who went pale as a sheet. A whisper rippled through the room. Helen's face contorted with rage and shock. "It's a lie," she shouted. "He is delirious with grief." "It's Robert's own word," I replied calmly, and began to read aloud from his diary, about how he'd found the messages in Helen's phone, how she denied everything, calling him paranoid, how he realized that she and Bruce may have been waiting for him to die so they could be together. With each word, the faces of those gathered changed from disbelief to shock, from shock to condemnation. Helen stood frozen like a statue, her face turning white and then red with rage. "And that's not all," I continued, pulling out Robert's letter. "My son had written me a letter the day before he died, a letter that Helen obviously didn't want me to receive." I began to read the letter, in which Robert apologized to me for the years of estrangement, explaining how Helen had manipulated him, turning him against me, how he had changed his will after learning of her infidelity. When I finished reading, there was dead silence in the room. All eyes were fixed on Helen and Bruce, who stood side by side, not daring to look at each other. It's a fake," Helen said at last. "He made the whole thing up. Robert would never—" "It's Robert's handwriting," one of her colleagues from the law firm interrupted her. "I've worked with him for 10 years. I recognize his hand. And his new will is already in my hands," I added. "He changed it a week before he died. Helen only gets the minimum required by law." Bruce looked up at last, and there was despair in his eyes. "Helen, I don't understand. You said he didn't know anything." "Shut up, you idiot," she hissed, but it was too late. His words were actually a confession. "By the way, Bruce," I added, turning to him, "you were with Robert when he got sick. You called the ambulance. But were you really interested in getting there in time?" The whispers swept through the room again. Now the guests were starting to back away from Helen and Bruce as if they were contagious. "How dare you!" Helen shouted, taking a step toward me. Her eyes threw lightning bolts. "How dare you accuse us of that you cheated on my son with his best friend, for hiding his illness from me, denying us a chance to reconcile before he died? In the fact that you told me today at the cemetery, 'You're next,' with an expression as if it were a threat?" At the last words, Helen's face contorted with horror. She realized she had lost. I never said, no, that's exactly what you said. Bruce's father, an older man who happened to be standing close enough to hear our conversation in the cemetery, interrupted her. I did. And now I know what you meant. My God, Bruce, what have you gotten yourself into? Bruce stood with his shoulders slumped, unable to meet his father's gaze or anyone else in the room. Helen looked around at those gathered, and I could see the realization of what was happening slowly creeping across her face. Her reputation is ruined. Her plans are ruined. Everything she'd worked for crumbled to dust because of the old man she despised so much. You all believed him? She exclaimed in despair. That old fool? He's just jealous that Robert chose me over him. But her words sounded pathetic and unconvincing. The evidence was too obvious, her behavior too blatant. One by one, the guests began to leave the house. Some cast scornful glances at Helen and Bruce. Others simply walked out in silence, not wanting to be part of the scandal. Helen's parents sat in the corner, shocked and ashamed by their daughter's behavior. Bruce's father leaned heavily on his cane, his face expressing deep disappointment. I stood in the center of the empty living room, feeling strangely calm. I had done what Robert had asked. I had done justice. And while it wouldn't bring my son back, wouldn't fill the void in my heart, I knew I had done the right thing. Helen looked at me with a hatred she no longer tried to hide. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I swear you'll regret it. No, Helen, I answered calmly. You will, for what you said to me at the cemetery today, for betraying my son, for choosing money and comfort over love and honesty. I took a step toward the exit and turned around one last time. By the way, this house is mine now. You have a week to pack your things and move out. With those words, I walked outside where I was greeted by the cool evening air. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe freely. Something was over, and something new was beginning. A life without Robert, but with justice restored, with a sense of fulfilled duty to my son. I was walking slowly to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I saw Bruce catching up to me with a confused look on his face. Alfred, he began uncertainly. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, I replied. Nothing will bring my son back. Sakfur, I never wished Robert harm, he said, and there was sincerity in his voice. I loved him like a brother. What happened to Helen? It just happened, but I never wanted him to die. Never. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to decide whether to believe him. After all, what did it matter? Well, Bruce, I said finally, I hope it was worth it. I got in my car and drove away, leaving behind a house full of shattered illusions and the man who had betrayed my son. The silence that reigned seemed palpable. My words still hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Helen's face contorted with rage, fear, and humiliation all at once. The mask of the grieving widow finally falling away, revealing her true nature. It's an absolute lie, she shouted, glaring at the remaining guests. He's out of his mind with grief. He made up this whole story to smear me. Her voice shook with barely contained hysteria. She turned to Bruce, who stood pale, with drops of sweat on his forehead. Tell them, Bruce, she demanded. Tell them it's an old man's nonsense. Bruce opened his mouth but didn't say a word, as if he'd forgotten how to speak. His eyes darted between me, Helen, and the other guests. I could see him struggling with himself, a battle going on inside him between lies and truth. One of the lawyers from Robert's firm, a full-figured, middle-aged man named Walter Price, stepped forward, holding the printouts I'd provided. This is indeed Robert's handwriting, he said, looking at the letter. I worked with him for 15 years. I could recognize his handwriting anywhere. Helen's sister, Pamela, who had been standing quietly in the corner all this time, spoke up suddenly. I always knew something was wrong, she said, looking at her older sister. Those long weekends when you supposedly went to art fairs. Those late-night phone calls you answered in the other room. The way you and Bruce looked at each other when you thought no one could see. Shut up, Pamela, Helen hissed. You don't know anything. No, I know enough, Pamela replied calmly. And I've been silent for too long. Robert deserved better. Bruce's father, Harold Norman, leaning heavily on his cane, approached his son. His face expressed a mixture of disappointment and anger. Is it true, son? He asked quietly. You and Robert's wife? Your best friend? Bruce raised his eyes, meeting his father's gaze. At that moment, something in him broke. His shoulders slumped, and he nodded almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, barely audible. It just happened. A whisper rolled through the room. Bruce's confession was the final nail in the coffin of Helen's reputation. Her face froze in a mask of shock and betrayal. Bruce? She exhaled, unable to believe her ears. What are you doing? Telling the truth, Helen, he replied, and his voice grew stronger. For the first time in a long time. Robert deserves at least that. Helen recoiled from him like a leper. Her eyes swept the room, searching for support, but met only condemnation and disgust. You don't understand, she said, trying to pull herself together. Robert and I, we had problems. He wasn't the perfect husband everyone made him out to be. Don't you dare sully his memory. I was outraged, taking a step in her direction. Don't you dare lie about him when he can't defend himself. Bruce suddenly straightened up, as if making some kind of decision. No, Helen, no more lies, he said firmly. I can't do it anymore. He turned to the crowd. Mr. Greenlee is right. Helen and I, we had an affair for almost 2 years. Robert found out about it shortly before he died. Helen made a sound like a strangled scream. Her eyes widened with horror and rage. You traitor, she spat out. You promised me. I promised Robert my friendship and loyalty long before you did, Bruce replied, remorse in his voice. And I betrayed him. We both did. But I can't live a lie anymore. He turned to me. Mr. Greenlee, I know no apology will bring your son back to you, but I have to tell you, when Robert collapsed in the office, I did call an ambulance. Immediately, I never wanted him dead, I swear to you. It was a heart attack caused by complications of diabetes. The doctor said that even if the ambulance had arrived 5 minutes earlier, he still wouldn't have been saved. I looked at this man, trying to see if he was telling the truth. He might be, but that didn't change the fact that he had betrayed my son by cheating with his wife. Was Robert really going to get a divorce? I asked, turning to Bruce. He nodded. Yes, he went to Jeffrey Lancaster, the divorce lawyer, a week ago. He didn't say anything at the firm to avoid gossip, but that was my client. One of the guests, a thin man with a neat beard, suddenly spoke up. Robert Greenlee was consulting with me about a divorce. I couldn't mention it before because of confidentiality, but under the circumstances, yes, he wanted an annulment. He had evidence of his wife's infidelity. Helen looked like she'd been punched. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the pallor that spread across her face. It's not true, she murmured, but without the same confidence. He would never do anyone. He was going to announce the divorce to you the day he had the heart attack, Bruce said. He told me this morning. I tried to talk him out of it, told him to wait, to think it over, but he was adamant. Bruce lowered his head. I realize now that I was just afraid for myself, for my reputation. What a coward I am. Helen's father, who had been silent until then, suddenly rose from his chair. His face was stern and determined. We are leaving, he said, turning to his wife. Immediately. Richard, Helen began, but he interrupted her. Shut up. You've dishonored our family. He turned to me. Mr. Greenlee, my sincere condolences, and my apologies. If I had known, I nodded, accepting his words. He was as hurt as I was, a parent whose child had disappointed him. Gradually, the guests began to disperse. Some approached me, expressing support. Others simply left the house in silence, not wanting to remain in the midst of the scandal. Among the latter were those who cast judgmental glances at Helen and Bruce. Helen stood in the middle of the empty living room, like a statue. Her eyes were dry, but they held the desperation of a cornered animal. Bruce stood back, not daring to approach her. Ike, are you satisfied? She finally said, turning to me. You ruined my life. You destroyed my reputation. No, Helen, I answered calmly. You ruined it all yourself. With your lies, your treachery, your greed. All I did was show people the truth. The truth? She laughed bitterly. You think you know the truth? You know nothing about Robert and me, about our lives. I know enough, I said. I know you cheated on my son with his best friend. I know you hid his illness from me. I know you planned to get his money when he died, and I know you threatened me at the cemetery today." Bruce twitched when he heard the last words. "What?" he interjected, looking at Helen. "You threatened his father? Helen, how could you?" "I didn't threaten him," she snapped back. "I was just stating a fact. He's an old man. Of course he'll die before us." Bruce shook his head, taking another step away from her. "I don't recognize you," he whispered. "Who are you?" Helen shifted her gaze from him to me and back again, her face contorted with rage. "So you're on his side now?" she spat out. "After everything we planned? After all our talks about the future?" "I never planned for Robert's death," Bruce said firmly. "Never. What happened between us was a mistake. I betrayed my friend, but I never wished him harm." "Liar!" Helen screamed. "You're a hypocrite like the rest of them. How could you set me up like that? Betray me?" She turned to me, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think you've won? That you've done justice?" Her voice trembled with restrained rage. "You've accomplished nothing. Robert can't be brought back. He's dead. And all you have left is your bitterness and loneliness." With these words, she rushed to the stairs leading to the second floor. She returned a few minutes later with a small bag, hastily stuffed with things. "I'm leaving," she announced, heading for the exit. "Enjoy your victory, old man. I hope it keeps you warm in your empty house." The door slammed behind her with such force that a photograph fell from the wall. Robert and Helen on their wedding day, smiling and happy. The glass of the frame shattered, showering the floor with shards. It was just me and Bruce in the living room. He looked devastated, as if every bone in his body had been removed. "Mr. Greenlee," he began hesitantly. "Go away," I said quietly. "Just go." He nodded, realizing that no words could undo what he had done. Slowly, he headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold. "I really loved him," he said without turning around. "As a friend, like a brother. What happened to Helen? It was a weakness, a mistake. I'd give anything to go back and change that." I didn't answer. What could I say to a man who betrayed my son's trust? That his remorse changes nothing? That forgiveness didn't belong to me? When the door closed behind Bruce, I was alone in my son's house. A house that now, under the new will, belonged to me, but in which I felt like a stranger. I walked slowly into Robert's study, sat in his chair and looked around. Everything in here breathed him, his books on the shelves, his papers on the desk, his pictures on the walls. I let myself cry, not from the grief that still lived inside me, but from a strange relief. Justice had been done. The truth had come out. Helen and Bruce had gotten what they deserved, but it wouldn't bring Robert back. Never. I don't know how long I spent there, sitting in silence, alone with my memories. Evening turned to night, but I kept the lights on. I liked to sit in the semi-darkness, imagining that Robert was around, that I could talk to him. "I did it, son," I whispered into the void. "Just like you asked. Now everyone knows the truth about her, about both of them." I thought I felt his presence, his approval. Maybe it was just a play of imagination, or maybe a part of him really did stay here, in this house, among his things and memories. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my reverie. I picked up the receiver without thinking. "Alfred Greenlee speaking." "Mr. Greenlee, this is Pamela, Helen's sister." The voice in the receiver sounded agitated. "I just wanted to say, I admire your courage. What you did today. Not many people would have done." "Thank you, Pamela," I replied, surprised by her calm. "But I just wanted people to know the truth." And they did," she said with something like satisfaction in her voice. "Helen always got everything she wanted, always got away with it, but not this time." "You don't support your sister?" I asked, genuinely interested. Pamela laughed bitterly. "Support? After what she's done?" "No, Mr. Greenlee, I loved Robert. He was a good man. He deserved better than my sister." She was quiet for a moment, then added quietly, "I knew about her and Bruce. Saw them together once, in town, when they thought no one would recognize them. I should have told Robert, but I couldn't. I was afraid of the scandal, the publicity, and now Robert's dead and I'll live with that guilt for the rest of my life." I didn't know what to say. Her confession was unexpected, and I wasn't ready to comfort another guilt-ridden man. "You are not to blame for his death, Pamela. I said at last. No one could have foreseen that his heart would fail. Perhaps, she sighed, but I could have spared him the pain of betrayal, give him a chance to leave Helen early, to start a new life. She was silent for a moment, then changed the subject. What will you do with the house? I hesitated. I hadn't decided what to do with Robert's inheritance, the house, his share of the law firm, his savings. I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe I'll sell it. Too many memories. I understand, she said. Anyway, if you need any help with Robert's things or anything else, I'm always willing to help. Her offer sounded sincere, and I was grateful for this small show of humanity on a day filled with bitterness and disappointment. Thank you, Pamela. I appreciate it. After talking to her, I sat in Robert's office for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. I had buried my only son, exposed his unfaithful wife and her lover, and now I was sitting in his house, not knowing what to do next. The grief still lingered in me, heavy and deep. But there was another feeling mixed in with it, the bitter satisfaction of justice restored. Helen had gotten what she deserved. Her reputation ruined, her plans upset. Bruce, too, would suffer the consequences of his betrayal. His father would apparently never forgive him, and clients were unlikely to want to do business with a man who cheated with his partner's wife. But all these thoughts seemed empty and useless in the face of the central, unchanging truth. Robert was dead, and nothing could bring him back. I left the study and slowly walked around the house that was now mine. Big, stylish, impersonal, so unlike the cozy clutter of my own abode. Helen always cared about the exterior gloss, about how things looked from the outside. But behind that facade was an emptiness, the emptiness of their relationship, the emptiness of her soul. In Robert's bedroom, I found his old sweater, the same one Helen had despised for being sloppy. I pressed it to my face, inhaling my son's scent. Faint, barely perceptible, but still present. For a moment, I thought he was here, right next to me. I miss you, son, I whispered. I will always miss you. In the morning, I decided to go back to my house. I couldn't stay at Robert's house. Too many memories, too much pain. Maybe later I would find the strength to deal with his things, with his inheritance, but not now. On my way out, I ran into the mailman, who brought a stack of condolence envelopes. Among them was an envelope from Robert's law firm addressed to him. I took it with me, deciding to open it later. At home, in the quiet of my living room, I finally allowed myself to fully realize what had happened. My son is dead. He had been betrayed by the people closest to him, and I was left alone, with a house I didn't need, money that couldn't comfort me, and a void that nothing would fill. But I also knew that I had fulfilled Robert's last request. I had done justice. I had shown everyone the true face of Helen and Bruce, and while it wouldn't bring my son back, it gave me a strange, bittersweet satisfaction. I opened the envelope from the law firm, expecting to see some papers related to Robert's cases. But inside was a lonely sheet with a short text. It was a notice of dissolution of partnership between Robert and Bruce, dated the day Robert died. Not only had my son changed his will and contacted a divorce attorney, he had also begun the process of getting out of the business with Bruce. He was really going to start a new life. A life without Helen, without Bruce perhaps, with a restored relationship with me. But fate had it differently. I folded the notice neatly and put it in my desk drawer, with the other papers related to Robert. It was another little piece of truth, another proof that my son had finally had an epiphany and was ready to change his life. I sat back in my old chair, feeling strangely calm. Justice had been served. The truth had come out. Helen and Bruce had gotten what they deserved. And though the pain of loss had not gone away, I knew I had done everything Robert had asked me to do. I'd done my last duty to him. The week after the funeral dragged agonizingly slowly. I spent my days in my house, avoiding people and their sympathetic glances. News of the scandal at Robert's wake spread through Mesquite with lightning speed. In a small town, such events don't go unnoticed. I received calls from neighbors offering to help, but I politely declined. I needed to be alone, to process what had happened, to learn to live with the pain of loss. I never showed up at Robert's house. I couldn't bring myself to cross the threshold of my own home, where everything reminded me of my son. Pamela called several times, saying that Helen had taken her personal belongings and disappeared without leaving an address. Bruce was rumored to have left town as well. Their treachery had been exposed, and they could no longer stay in Mesquite, where everyone knew the truth. On Thursday, exactly a week after the funeral, as I was having breakfast on my veranda, watching the waking garden, the letter carrier brought a registered letter. I signed for it, looking curiously at the envelope with the logo of Stevens & Associates, a law firm from nearby Dallas. Back at the house, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several documents and a cover letter on letterhead. Dear Mr. Greenlee, it is with regret that I learn of the passing of your son, Robert Allen Greenlee. I feel it is my duty to inform you of the legal aspects involved in his last will. On October 12th of this year, Robert Greenlee visited our firm for the purpose of making a new will. The previous document, made 5 years ago, has been revoked. Under the new version, the bulk of his estate, including his home in Mesquite, his interest in the law firm of Greenlee and Norman, and his personal savings and investments, passes to you, his father. His wife, Helen Prestwood Greenlee, is left the minimum share required by Texas state law for spouses, namely the sum of $50,000 in cash. Robert also left a personal letter addressed to you for safekeeping at our firm, which I am enclosing herewith. Please contact our office at your convenience to discuss the details of the property transfer and the necessary paperwork. Sincerely, Jeffrey Stevens, Senior Partner, Stevens & Associates. I set the letter aside, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Just because I had found Robert's note about the safety deposit box and learned about the new will, it hadn't yet meant formal recognition of that fact. Now it was formal, legal. Robert's estate was going to me, not Helen. I pictured her face when she received the same letter, and I experienced a fleeting satisfaction that was immediately replaced by bitterness. What was the point of all this money and possessions if my son was gone? My gaze fell on the second envelope enclosed in the lawyer's letter. My name was written on it in Robert's hand. My heart sank at the sight of the familiar handwriting. I opened the envelope carefully, afraid of damaging the last message from my son. Dear Dad, if you are reading these lines, it means I am no longer alive. It sounds like the beginning of a cheap detective story, but I can't find any other words. I had hoped to tell you everything in person, but we never know how much time we have left. I have to admit that I've made a lot of mistakes over the last few years. The biggest one is that I let our relationship fall apart, letting Helen come between us. I realize now that you saw right through her from the start, saw what I refused to admit even to myself. Her coldness, her calculating, her insincerity. You tried to warn me, but I dismissed you as just a jealous father unwilling to share his son with another woman. I was blind and stupid. I fell in love with a beautiful facade, not realizing the emptiness behind it, or maybe I didn't want to realize it. I loved our life, successful career, beautiful wife, elegant home. Everything looked perfect from the outside. It was only now that I realized it was all a fake. 2 weeks ago, I happened to see messages on Helen's phone. Messages from Bruce, my partner, my best friend since college, a man I trusted like I trusted myself. Turns out they'd been together for over a year, meeting in motels in neighboring towns, in his apartment when I'm on business trips, planning a future, their future without me. When I asked Helen about it, she denied it, called me paranoid, said the illness was clouding my judgment. But I saw the messages with my own eyes. Miss you. Can't wait to be together again. Soon, love, be patient. What did that soon mean? When I die of complications from diabetes? I don't know if she was capable of such calculated cruelty. I don't know if she wanted me dead or if she was just taking advantage of the situation. But one thing I do know is that she never really loved me. I was a means to an end, not a goal. A way to gain status, a comfortable life, social connections. But worst of all, she's been turning me against you all this time. I can see it clearly now. All those little remarks, all those accidental scheduling glitches when you and I planned to meet, she methodically destroyed our bond, isolating me from the one person who truly loved me unselfishly. Dad, I'm so sorry for the years we lost. The Sunday dinners I canceled, the fishing trips I didn't go on, the family holidays when I preferred the company of her snobby friends to your warm home. If I could turn back the clock, but I can't. All I can do is try to undo at least what I can. I've changed my will. Most of my estate will go to you, not Helen. She'll only get the bare minimum required by law. I know you don't want my money. You've always been a modest man, content with little, but this is the only way to make sure she doesn't benefit from my death. I've also started divorce and separation proceedings with Bruce. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to tell you all about it in person, to start over, to catch up. But if you're reading this letter, I haven't had enough time. Daddy, I want you to know that I've always loved you, even when I was far away, even when it seemed like I didn't care. You were the best father a boy could ever dream of having. Patient, loving, wise. You taught me everything important in this life. Honesty, hard work, compassion. I wish I had always followed your lessons. Forgive me for all the times I've disappointed you. For all the times I chose the wrong path. For all the years we could have spent together but lost because of my blindness. I love you, Daddy. And wherever I am now, I hope you can forgive me. Your son, Robert. I reread the letter over and over again, unable to hold back the tears. Every word, every line was soaked with genuine remorse and love. Robert realized the truth about Helen, realized how she had manipulated him all these years. He wanted to make things right, to start over, but fate had decided otherwise. I remembered his last visit, a month ago, his tired face, his uncertain movements. He wanted to tell me the truth then, but he didn't dare. Maybe he wasn't ready to admit the extent of the betrayal, or maybe he wanted to settle things legally before he revealed himself to me. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. It was the most precious thing my son had left me. Not the house, not the money, not the stake in the law firm, but these words coming from the heart. An acknowledgement that despite the years of estrangement, despite all the mistakes and misunderstandings, our bond had never truly broken. I spent the rest of the day thinking about Robert's letter and what I should do with his inheritance. A house in an upscale neighborhood, a stake in a successful law firm, investments and savings all required attention and decisions. But I couldn't bring myself to think of it as money or possessions. To me, they were pieces of my son's life, his labor, his hopes and dreams. In the evening, Pamela called. After the scandal at the wake, she had become something of a link between me and the outside world. She gave me news of Helen, or lack thereof, helped me with paperwork and other formalities I was unable to do myself. Mr. Greenlee, her voice sounded concerned. How are you today? Not bad, Pamela, I replied. I got a letter from Robert's lawyer and a personal letter from my son. I see, she paused, clearly unsure of how to respond. It's difficult, I guess. Yes and no. Robert's letter brought me a strange comfort. He understood everything at the end. About Helen, about how she'd manipulated him. I only wish he'd had time to tell me in person. I'm glad you have at least that, Pamela said sincerely, knowing that he realized the truth, that he wanted to make things right. Thank you, Pamela. I was quiet for a moment, and then I asked, how are your parents, after everything that's happened? They're having a hard time, she sighed. Sarna, my father's furious, at Helen, at himself for not seeing her true face. Mom's just confused. Can't understand how her daughter could act so heartless. I'm sorry your family is suffering because of this too, I said sincerely. Helen's parents were not to blame for their daughter's actions. They had always struck me as snobbish, but they didn't deserve this shame. It wasn't your fault, Mr. Greenlee, and it's not Robert's fault. Helen made her choice, and so did Bruce. Her voice has hardened. Speaking of Bruce, I heard his father kicked him out of the family home, said he wanted nothing to do with a man capable of such treachery. I can't blame him, I replied. Harold Norman was an old-fashioned man of strong principles. Honor and loyalty were not empty words to him. And also, Pamela paused, Helen called this morning. For the first time in a week, I tensed. What did she want? To see if you'd gotten a letter from your lawyer, and to tell me she's contesting the will. Claims Robert was out of his mind because of his illness when he changed it. Let him try. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. I have his diary and his letter. They clearly show that he was in his right mind and fully aware of what he was doing. That's what I told her, Pamela replied. She hung up. After talking to Pamela, I walked out on the veranda, looking up at the sunset sky. The golden pink hues reminded me of Robert's childhood, when he and I would often sit out here watching the sunset. He asked 1,000 questions about the sky, about the stars, about why the sunset was so colorful, and I would answer as best I could, sometimes making up fantastic stories, sometimes admitting that I didn't know the answer. Those memories seem so distant now, as if from another life, and at the same time so vivid, as if everything had happened yesterday. Time is strangely distorted when it comes to those we've lost. The next day, I finally forced myself to go to Robert's house. I had to sort through his things, decide what to do with the house. I couldn't put it off forever, no matter how much I wanted to. The house greeted me with silence and the smell of freshness. Apparently, Pamela had made sure the windows were open. I walked slowly through the rooms, touching Robert's things, remembering the rare times I'd been here. In his study, I found a few more personal items, old photo albums, school awards that he had kept despite Helen's desire to get rid of that junk. Among the papers on the desk was a small notebook I hadn't noticed before. When I opened it, I found Robert's handwritten notes, notes about his state of health, records of medications, test results. The last entry was made the day before he died. Sugar levels are off the charts again. Kidneys are working at maximum capacity. Dr. Reynolds insists on hospitalization, but I can't right now. Too much to take care of. Helen, the divorce, the firm, talking to my father. I hope I can get it all done before it gets worse. I closed the notebook, feeling a lump come up to my throat. He knew his condition was getting worse, knew time was short, and he was still putting off treatment, trying to fix all the problems first. If he'd put his health first, if he'd agreed to be hospitalized, maybe he'd be alive now. But what good would those if-onlys be? We can't change the past, no matter how much we wish we could. I spent hours at Robert's house sorting through his belongings, deciding what to keep, what to give to charity. His clothes, his books, his household goods, all the material things that made up the material part of his existence. But he himself, his laughter, his voice, his presence was gone, and never would be. When I returned home, I sat down at my desk and wrote a reply to Robert's attorney, informing him that I had received his letter and was willing to meet to discuss the details of the inheritance. I also mentioned Helen's intention to contest the will and asked his opinion on the chances of success of such a claim. Finished with the business correspondence, I pulled out an old photo album, the same one that Margaret and I had started keeping since Robert's birth. I flipped through the pages, watching our boy grow up in the pictures. Here he is, newborn, with his red, wrinkled face. Here he is taking his first steps, holding his mother's hand. Here he is going to the first grade, proudly carrying a backpack that is too big for him. Here is the graduation at school, university. His whole life was captured in these pictures, but there was also another life, the one that was not in the frame. Moments of joy and sadness, triumphs and defeats, love and disappointment. Everything that made him a human being, not just an image in photographs. I took Robert's letter out of the envelope and reread it again. Those words were my only comfort now, the knowledge that he understood everything at the end, that he loved me despite the years of estrangement, that he regretted the lost time as much as I did. I love you, Daddy, and wherever I am now, I hope you can forgive me. I forgive you, son, I whispered into the emptiness of the room, and I love you too. Always have and always will. In that moment, holding the last message from my son in my hands, I finally felt like I could move on with my life. Not forgetting him, never forgetting him, but learning to carry that memory not as a burden, but as a gift. The gift of a man who, despite his mistakes and misconceptions, finally found the strength to see the truth and try to fix what could still be fixed. Robert didn't get to do everything he had planned. Life ended too soon, leaving so many unspoken words, undone deeds, unfulfilled hopes. But his final act, a letter to me, a changed will, was an act of love and justice. And I was grateful for it, for the fact that at the end of the journey we had found our way to each other, even if only in words written on paper. 3 months flew by. Winter covered Mesquite with its cold blanket, decorated the trees with hoarfrost, slowed down the flow of life. I was slowly getting used to a reality without Robert. The pain didn't go away. It just got quieter, became a constant companion with whom I learned to coexist. I sold my son's house. I couldn't bring myself to live there. Too many memories, too many ghosts of the past. The new owners were a young couple with a young child. I liked the idea that there would be the sound of children's laughter in those walls again, that life would go on, no matter what. Robert's share in the law firm I offered to buy out the partners. Bruce had already left the firm, unable to withstand the judgmental stares of colleagues and clients. Rumors of his betrayal spread quickly, and the reputation so important to the lawyer was hopelessly damaged. The remaining partners readily purchased Robert's share, relieving me of the necessity of delving into matters in which I understood nothing. I often went to the cemetery, brought flowers to my son's grave, and talked to him at length. I told him about my days, about the weather, about my neighbors, about the news of the town, about how the foundation in his name was coming along. I knew he couldn't hear me, but these monologues helped keep me connected, gave the illusion of an ongoing dialogue. That January morning, as usual, I woke up with the first rays of the sun. Outside the window was freshly fallen snow, sparkling in the sunlight. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my desk where the papers related to the creation of the Robert Greenlee Foundation for Diabetes Care were lying around. I had gotten the idea shortly after receiving a letter from my son. I didn't need his money, but I wanted it to serve a good purpose, to help others suffering from the same disease. The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. It was Pamela, who had become something of a friend over the months. "Good morning, Alfred." Her voice sounded cheerful. "How are you today?" "Not bad, Pamela," I answered. "I'm working on some papers for the foundation. How are you?" "I'm good. Calling to tell you the news about Helen." She paused. "I thought you might be interested." I tensed. Helen's name still evoked complex emotions in me. Anger, bitterness, disappointment. "What happened?" She moved to Austin," Pamela said. "She opened a small art gallery there, and it looks like she's starting a new life." "With Bruce?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "No." I could hear the satisfaction in Pamela's voice. "After the scandal, they broke up. Bruce went to California as far as I know. He's trying to start from scratch where he's not known." I was strangely relieved. It wasn't that I wished them unhappiness. It was just that the thought of them enjoying life together after all they'd done to Roberta was unbearable. "Had she tried to contest the will?" I asked. "She had, but to no avail. Robert's lawyer provided all the evidence he needed to prove that he was of sound mind when he changed the will, plus evidence of her infidelity. Anyway, the judge dismissed the suit." I nodded, though Pamela couldn't see it. "Thank you for letting me know." "You're welcome, Alfred. By the way, how's the foundation coming along?" "Slowly but surely. Bureaucracy, as always, takes time. But I hope that by the end of the month, all the formalities will be settled." "That's a wonderful idea," Pamela said sincerely. "Robert would be touched." After the conversation, I stared out the window for a long time, pondering the news. Helen is in Austin, starting a new life. Bruce is in California, trying to escape his past. And I'm here in Mesquite, in the house where Robert grew up, keeping my son's memory alive and trying to do something good in his name. It's strange how the paths of people who were once closely associated with each other diverge, how seemingly unbreakable bonds are broken, and how new, unexpected ones arise. I went back to the papers for the foundation, but my thoughts kept returning to Helen. I didn't hate her, just a mixture of pity and disappointment, a woman who chose money and comfort over true love, who manipulated my son, alienated him from me, cheated on him with his best friend. And yet, something made Robert love her once, something I didn't see or didn't want to see. My thoughts were interrupted by another phone call. This time it was Walter Price, a former colleague of Robert's who had helped me with the organizational aspects of setting up the foundation. "Alfred, I have great news," he said without preamble. "The board of directors of the city hospital has approved our proposal. They are ready to provide space for the Robert Greenlee Diabetes Center." I felt a warm wave of gratitude and relief wash over me. "That's wonderful, Walter. When can we start work?" "As soon as the papers are signed. A week or two, I think. One more thing. The local paper wants to do a story on this. They want an interview with you. I hesitated. Publicity was never my strong suit, but if it'll help the foundation, bring attention to diabetes. Okay, I'll do it. Have them contact me. After the conversation, I decided to walk around the city. The frosty air was invigorating, the snow crunching underfoot. Mesquite was preparing for the annual winter festival. The streets were festooned with garlands. Festive decorations appeared in store windows. Life went on, despite personal tragedies and losses. I reached the city park where Robert and I had often walked when he was little. The park was almost empty now, with only a few children sliding down the slide and an elderly couple feeding bread to the ducks on the pond. I sat on a bench watching this peaceful scene and felt strangely peaceful. The last 3 months had been difficult. I was learning to live without my son, with an emptiness that nothing could fill. Learning to wake up every morning knowing I wouldn't hear his voice or see his smile. I learned to find meaning in the little things, a cup of morning coffee, a good book, helping others. Creating a foundation helped me find a purpose, a direction. I knew I couldn't bring Robert back, but I could help others suffering from the same disease. I could make his name associated not only with tragedy and scandal, but also with hope, with helping those in need. When I returned home, I found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a postcard with a view of Austin and a short note. Alfred, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I don't expect an answer. I just want you to know that I never wished for Robert's death. What happened between Bruce and me is unforgivable, I know, but I'm not the monster you think I am. I've started a new life in Austin. I'm trying to make things right, to be a better person. And I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you and Robert. Helen. I stared at the card for a long time, not knowing how to feel. Was it a sincere gesture of remorse or another manipulation? Could it be that, having learned of the foundation and my handling of Robert's inheritance, she had decided to try to repair the relationship? Or was it just a need for forgiveness, for closure on this sad chapter of life? I didn't know the answer and decided it didn't matter. Helen was no longer a part of my life. Whatever she felt, whatever she thought, it was no longer my concern. I put the card in my desk drawer with the other papers related to Robert. Perhaps someday I would reread it and find the strength to forgive her. But not now. The wound is still too fresh. The following weeks passed in the hassle of opening a diabetic center. I met with doctors, discussed equipment to be purchased, patient education programs. I gave interviews to the local newspaper, talking about my son and the importance of early diagnosis and proper treatment of diabetes. Gradually, the center took shape and content. It turned from an abstract idea into a reality, a place where people could get help, information, and support, a place where Robert's name would be associated with something good and useful. On the day of the official opening of the center, many people gathered: city officials, doctors, journalists, and just concerned citizens. The mayor made a speech about the importance of such initiatives, about how one person can change the lives of many for the better. The head doctor of the hospital told about the plans of the center, about new methods of treatment, which will be available thanks to the equipment purchased with the funds of the fund. And then it was my turn. I stood in front of the microphone, looking at the sea of unfamiliar faces, and thought about Robert, about how he was as a child, inquisitive, kind, full of life, about how he had become as an adult, successful, but losing himself in the pursuit of other people's expectations, about how at the end of his life he began to return to his true values, but didn't have time to complete the journey. My son, Robert Greenlee, didn't live to see his 52nd birthday, I began, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. He died from complications of diabetes, a disease that affects millions of people around the world, a disease that can be controlled with the right treatment and lifestyle. I talked about how Robert fought the disease, how he tried not to let it limit his life, how he dreamed of helping others in a similar situation. This center is his dream come true, I concluded, a place where people can get not only medical care, but also support, understanding, hope. I know Robert would be proud to see his legacy helping others. After the ceremony, a middle-aged woman approached me with a boy about 10 years old. "Mr. Greenlee," she began, extending her hand, "I'm Sarah Jenkins, And this is my son, Tommy. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 2 years ago. The boy smiled shyly at me, showing me the braces on his teeth. We wanted to thank you personally, Sarah continued. A center like this is exactly what our town needs. A place where Tommy and other children can learn to manage their condition, where we parents can get support and information. I looked at the boy, at his open face, at a future that was just beginning, and felt my eyes fill with tears. Thank you, I said. It means a lot to me. In the evening when I got home after a long day, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea and a picture of Robert in my hands. It was a picture taken just before he married Helen. He was smiling at the camera, his eyes shining. The whole future seemed bright and promising. We did it, son, I whispered, looking at the photograph. The center is open. It will help people like you. Kids like Tommy. I hope you would approve. In that moment, I felt a strange peace. The pain of loss wasn't gone, but it was bearable. I knew I would always miss Robert, would always regret the years we had lost. But now I had a purpose, a way to keep his memory alive, not only in my heart, but in the hearts of others. I thought of Helen, somewhere in Austin trying to start a new life, about Bruce fleeing to California from his betrayal, about how strange fates sometimes are, how unpredictable the twists and turns of life. There was no reconciliation with Helen, and I didn't know if it was ever possible. Too much pain, too much deceit stood between us. But there was justice, not vengeful justice, not gloating justice, but quiet, bitter justice. The truth came out. Everyone got what they deserved. And out of the tragedy, something good was born, a center that will help people for years to come. I put Robert's picture on the mantelpiece next to Margaret's. My favorite people who are no longer around, but who will always live on in my heart. Life went on, not the way I expected or planned, not the life I dreamed of, but it still had beauty, meaning, and the opportunity to do something good for others. And that, I think, is what it's all about, to keep going despite loss and disappointment, in finding meaning even in the darkest of times, in not letting bitterness and resentment define our lives. Robert realized this at the end. He tried to right his wrongs, to restore justice, to start over. He didn't get to complete that journey, but I could have continued it for him. I could fulfill what he probably dreamed of, helping others, leaving something good behind. And in that was my quiet, bitter victory. Not over Helen or Bruce, over circumstance, over despair, over the emptiness of loss. A victory that brought no particular joy, but gave me strength to go on. I finished my tea looking at the snow-covered garden outside the window. Winter was gradually receding. The days were getting longer. Soon spring would come, and everything would be alive again, green and blooming. Life will continue in its eternal cycle of renewal and growth, and I will be part of that cycle, an old man with a broken but unbroken heart. A man who lost his son but found a way to keep his memory alive. A man who knows the value of truth and justice. I closed my eyes, feeling strangely calm. There was a new day ahead, new worries, new opportunities to do something good, and that was reason enough to keep going.